Hello. In this video, we're going to talk about the English opening after the moves e4, d6, when white doesn't push d4 anymore. So we're going to see knight c3 here and e4. I just want to mention that if white goes knight f3, it will transpose, for example, e5, knight c3 already transposes. So first of all, e4. With this move, white is seizing more space in the center, and he's trying to avoid lines with d4 and e5. And here white wants to prepare d4 in better conditions. I have to say this looks a bit weird to go like this because it gives black some options. And here we go e5, our typical setup. And our idea is to continue with f5 and knight f6. And here there's knight f3 and knight c3. Knight f3 already has the idea to go d4, but is less flexible. This can also be considered already as like a small inaccuracy because we can go c5 here, blocking the center, and the knight on f3 is slightly misplaced. Here we will just go knight c6, g6, bishop g7, and develop the knight to e7. So like this, we're going to break the symmetry, and on the long term, we can prepare f5, while with the knight on f3, white cannot do the same. Knight c3, continuing the normal development. And here we can challenge the center with f5. And we like this, we're also breaking the symmetry. Is this thing, if you want to make a draw, the symmetry is okay, but if you want to get a playable position, it's better to break the symmetry at some point. Well, c5 is also possible, but it's just what I was saying before. The position becomes too symmetrical and it's quite drawish. So f5. And here, well, there are some options. We're going to see e takes f5, d3, and g3. White can, of course, react in different ways. E takes f5 has to be considered because white wants to open up the center and then go for a quick d4. And here white wants to skip g3, bishop g2, just to act quickly. We take the pawn back. And again, white has some choices. Knight g2 is a move to prepare d4. Then there is queen f3 with a double attack. And why not just d4, breaking the center right away. Since the position opened up a little bit, we need to know what we're doing here with black. Knight g2 may look strange at first, but white is preparing both d4 and knight g3 with tempo. And a similar move to knight e2 would be knight f3, but here we can just block the center with c5 again with the knight on f3 misplaced. That's why uh, white white tries to be more tricky and goes for this knight e2. Well, here the knight on e2 looks misplaced nevertheless, and we can take advantage of it. It's this bishop d3 is a nice move because we only developed the bishop so far, but somehow on d3 the bishop is blocking white's position. White cannot go d4 anymore, and yeah, knight g3 is not ideal. Nevertheless, white needs to untangle somehow. So knight g3 is there. Bishop takes f1. And now if white doesn't want to lose the right to castle, he has to take with the knight. But the knight is not going to stay on f1. Then he has to move the knight somewhere else. So we're gaining some tempo. And now we can go knight c6 to gain control over d4 square. Now our idea is to just develop with knight f6, bishop e7, castle, and so on. And I think white wasted too much time with this maneuver. So bishop d3 was just in time. Oh no, e takes f5, bishop f5, and now, yes, now let's see queen f3. And this happened in a few games. The idea is pretty obvious, going for tricks early on, but this is not recommended because one shouldn't move the queen early on in the opening and just try to snatch some pawns, because once your opponent defends against this, then the queen will be misplaced. And of course, this can be easily parried with queen c8. And now the queen on f3 is blocking the development, so white has to do something about it. D4 is another move. And here white breaks the center immediately. But after we take on d4, he will have to recapture with the queen. This is the drawback. That's why ideally white wanted to play knight e2 or knight f3 first. He takes d4, queen d4, and knight c6. Of course, it's obvious to go like this, and we like to develop with tempo. In these situations, I really like the knight on c6. Now white doesn't really have a good place for the queen, so queen d1 is probably the best available square, but not to obstruct the development. Also, queen d1 is pairing knight b4 because of queen a4 check. However, we can see that white wasted time moving the queen. Now we can go queen d7, renewing the threat of knight b4. Now this threat is real. Knight f3, white has to go for development, and now if knight b4, there is knight d4. But already we are happy with what we achieved here, and we can just go g6 to fianchetto the bishop, then a long castle, and so on. And black has good development and active pieces. And again, it's not clear what white achieved with the queen takes d4 and queen d1 back. So this is e takes f5. D3 is another move, and it's actually the most played move in the position. And it makes sense, but after this, white will give up the ideas to push d4. However, now if we take on e4, white wants to take back with the d pawn, of course, and also the c1 bishop is open. Knight f6. I mean, the whole point of this d65 f5 setup is that we have some good control in the center, and now we need to develop the pieces. So knight f6. We're starting with the knights. Probably now the most ambitious is to go g3. Other moves like knight f3 or knight e2 are also possible, but um, a bit more passive and not achieving much, and we can just play like in the main line. So g3, and now bishop e7. And of course, this has idea we want to go castle, then c6, and so on with the normal setup. And this works because white is not in time to push d4 in one go. So bishop g2, castle. And here we see knight e2, which is the good move to develop the pieces, but you may wonder why not e takes f5 just to snatch a pawn. Well, that's an option, but it's not good. Bishop f5 is the only good move here. It's good to remember this detail. Now, perhaps white shouldn't take on b7, but then we're very happy that white took on f5. So the principled approach is to take on b7, principled and greedy approach. But now we can go just knight bd7, and suddenly white is in trouble here because of lack of development. And we have threats like knight c5 or even rook b8. It's not easy for white to defend. Black already has an advantage here. Let's see a sample line, for example, bishop a8. If white started taking, then you should probably continue doing so. Queen a8. But now this long diagonal is very weak for white, so just trying to ease off the tension with queen f3 to trade the queens. Queen takes, knight takes, and bishop d3. And despite being an exchange down, black has a large advantage here. You can see the king is still in the center, and black's pieces create all kind of threats. And another, what else would white do here? Because knight c5 looks like a very serious attacking both the bishop and the d3 pawn. There is maybe bishop e4, and not to take the exchange, but at least to trying to bail out somehow. But here we can take with the knight. D takes e4, bishop e6. You can notice the weakness of the light squares on the king side. b3, because c4 was under attack. And now just c6, preparing d5, and black is winning. And it's no wonder it's like this, since white doesn't have development, and now it's, it's not possible to defend anymore in this position. Let's go back. Knight g2 is the logical move to defend, and now we can go c6. Of course, now those tricks with e takes f5 are out of question because b7 will be protected. And also with c6, we are restricting the g2 bishop and we're controlling the important square d5. Castle, and now queen e8. This is the typical plan. Like you're going to see this in almost all the lines. Now the queen is heading towards h5. And of course, the position is unclear. It resembles a reversed Sicilian with the bishop e2 Sicilian, let's say, for white. And here we have many useful moves like king h8 makes sense to take the king away from the a2g diagonal. a5 is also good. And then knight a6, of course, to develop the knight. And black has a good position, whereas it's not so clear what is white's plan here. Let's go back. g3, just to get the bishop on the long diagonal, and then white is going to decide what to do with the d pawn. After developing the pieces, ideally white wants to go d4 in one move. We just developed knight f6, bishop g2, and knight c6. We're taking control over the d4 square. And it's very natural to develop the pieces. It was also possible to take on e4 here. But okay, knight c6. No need to take on e4 yet. And now the main move is knight e2. But we're going to see a little bit d3 here. So after d3, we can also fianchetto the bishop with g6, knight e2, bishop g7, castle, castle. And guess what? It's a reversed close Sicilian position. I mean, it's fine for both sides. It's playable for both sides. In my practice, I usually got this position with the black pieces. So here it would be white, but with one tempo less. But yeah, it's playable for both sides. The game just starts from here. So bishop knight e2, preparing at some point to push d4 in one move. And now since white skipped the move d3, we can take on e4 finally. We don't want to go g6 because of d4. So this is what we're trying to avoid. If white had played d3 before, then g6 would have been fine. We take on e4, knight e4, and bishop e7. There's no time to fianchetto the bishop. And if white takes on f6, we want to take with the bishop. Here we want to follow up with bishop f5, with castle. So just to complete the development. Here, if white is ambitious and tries to play for some advantage, can go d4, bishop f5. As promised, we're developing with tempo, and white has to do something with the knight. If he takes on f6, then we take with the bishop, and then our pieces are active. And or else if the knight falls back to c3, we can just castle, then queen d7, and normal play. But again, white wasted some time with the 94, 93. So this is e4. Now let's see 93. This is a flexible move. White keeps several options here to follow up with knight c3, but also with g3, bishop g2. And in all these lines, the knight on c3 is useful. e5. And now we're going to see knight f3, e3, e4, and finally g3. g3 is the main move. Knight f3, okay, we can get this position from different move orders. And now we go f5, our typical setup. Of course, we want to continue with knight f6, bishop e7, and so on. So let's say white goes d4, we push e4. And here if white goes knight g5, we play bishop e7, and this transposes to d4, d6, c4, e5. You can find it there. Instead, here we're going to consider knight g1, a move with, which became popular because it was recommended by strong engines. So white is losing 2 tempi with the knight, but at least the knight is safe there, and white forced us to push e4, and he achieved d4 in one go. So it makes some sense, but we're also happy with this outcome. c6 is a useful move, and this is what we usually play in this structure. So now we want bishop e7, knight f6. Yeah, we're going to see bishop f4. If knight h3, it transposes to d4, d6, e4, e5. So bishop f4 has a distinct value. And I have to say the bishop is well placed here. But on the other hand, white wanted to put the g1 knight on f4. So now that square is occupied. So white will have to find another solution for the knight, or maybe move the bishop again. Here we go bishop e7, but if we choose knight f6, it's just the same because these are the moves that we want to play anyway. But let's say bishop e7, e3, knight f6. Now this is typical for these positions to go h4 to gain some space. Maybe later on white can push the pawn even further and create some threats. Here we can go bishop e6. Um, the bishop is good on this diagonal, and we're happy to have the bishop here. Later on, we still have this idea to go knight a6, knight c7. Okay, white continues knight h3. He has to do something about the g1 knight. And now there is also this threat of knight g5. So we may as well stop it with h6. Bishop e2. Just finishing the development. Castle. Here we can castle because white has no good way to open up the king side. So the king is safe on g8. And now white has to do something about his knight on h3. That's why he goes bishop g3 with the idea to bring the knight to f4. Bishop f7. I mean, we'll have to fall back with the bishop anyway, so we might as well do it now. Knight f4 and knight a6. We just developing last piece, and the knight is getting to c7. And afterwards, it can go to e6 to trade knight on f4. Now this knight is strong, so we like to trade it. And again, it's very unclear position with all the pieces on the board. So there's going to be a long fight ahead. Objectively, the position is balanced. Let's go back. E3 can be considered some strange move. I mean, it's not a bad move. It's useful, but um, it's also not the most aggressive one. We can go f5, just continuing our plan. It's also possible to go g6 here. Since e3 is a bit passive. But let's say f5, d4, knight f6, and this transposes. So this e3 doesn't make much of a difference. e4 is there, but then f5, and it transposes to the lines we've just seen. And finally, let's see g3. Basically, this is the main move here. White has the knight on c3, which is the good place for the knight, and now he wants to fianchetto the bishop. And later on, he's going to see what to do with the g1 knight, maybe develop it to f3, or there is this idea to go e3 and knight e2. So white has several setups. Whenever possible, we go for f5. This is our setup. We're moving the pawns at first, but then we'll have good places for good squares for the pieces. And here we're going to consider bishop g2, which of course is the most natural move, but also d4 makes some sense. And here there are many transpositions. For example, knight f3, bishop e7, this transposes. So let's see d4. Usually white likes to do this, and now we'll have to consider the move d takes e5. It doesn't make much sense for us to take on d4 because we included this pawn on f5. But here we can just continue the development with bishop e7. And we want to make sure that after trade on e5, we can take on d8 with the bishop, so as not to lose the right to castle anymore. And here white has some choices: knight f3, d takes e5, and even bishop h3. The modern approach looks to me like some kind of computer move. Knight f3 makes a lot of sense. Attacking on e5 and provoking us to play e4. We go for it. What to do? Here I have to say that knight c6 is not so good because white can go d5, and then we probably need to go back with the knight. So, but we don't mind playing e4. It comes with tempo. Also, white cannot play knight g5 or knight h4. So this is an extra. Okay, it seems white can still go knight h4, but probably this is the result of deep analysis. So we're going to see knight h4 and knight g1 here. Knight g1 is possible now with the pawn on g3, but we have the same plan. It doesn't change much. We just go knight f6, c6, castle, then knight a6, knight c7, and so on. And this could lead to similar positions to as knight h4. Knight h4, this is the latest idea. It was found probably recommended by the engine, and several strong GMs took up this idea. White wants to reroute the knight to g2 and f4. Similar ideas could be also with the knight on g1, like knight g1, knight h3, and knight f4. And we just continue our plan with c6. A useful move to include. Here, it's good to avoid bishop h4, which apparently is good, but actually not so good. It wins a pawn, but after rook g1, white gets a strong initiative. So we're better off to avoid this. Just c6. Knight g2. The knight was not there to stay. Instead, white wants to go knight f4. Yeah, we can just continue with normal development, knight f6. Knight a6 is the same thing, but why not develop the other knight? Here white can go h4, let's say, and we have to go knight f6 anyway. So knight f6. And again, in this position, white has to do something about the knight and the bishop. If he goes bishop f4, the bishop will be well placed, but the knight also needs the f4 square. So that's why white wants to trade this bishop and then play knight f4. Castle. Here we want to go knight a6, knight c7, e3. The white is opening the light squared bishop. Obviously, the bishop would not do such a big job on g2, for example, after knight f4, bishop g2, because of this pawn on e4. So white wants to develop the bishop on the other diagonal. Knight a6. This is the typical development. We want to bring the knight to c7. And in this way, we're not obstructing our c8 bishop. Knight f4, knight c7. And now we have several ideas. One of them is to go knight e6 to trade these knights. Usually the knight on f4 is quite annoying if we cannot get to it, because it's putting pressure on our position, it's controlling e6 square, d5, g6, and so on. So we want to get rid of it. And there is another idea to just go knight g4 and trade the bishops. That also makes sense. And black went on to win a good game in Matamaras Franco Brkic, played in Baku 2023. D takes c5. We can expect if white tries to play for a draw. But we're happy to see this because white releases the tension, and then black is preferable. D takes c5, queen d8. This is the point, and now we can go bishop d8 in order to keep the right to castle. Knight f3, and knight e6 is a good move. We don't want to go e4 because the white knight can jump to d4. So that's why knight c6 is here. Now we want to go e4 because knight e4 is not available anymore for white. But also knight f6, bishop e6 are there with a great position for black. I like this. So in my view, if white takes on e5, he should at least force black to take with the king. If we can take with the bishop, I don't see much benefit from it. I mean, only black is better here. Bishop h3, the modern approach. trying to put some pressure on the f5 pawn. And here white wants to follow up with either d takes e5 or knight f3. Then knight f3, let's say e4, knight h4, and so on to attack on f5. I mean, it's possible, but to me it looks a bit artificial. And knight a6 is a good move here. It's not immediately the most obvious move, but it's good to develop the knight, and c6 is a good place. And here we want to avoid knight f6, which is like the most natural, but then knight f3, e4, knight h4, white's idea works, and now it's not easy to defend the f5 pawn. So knight a6, and of course we're developing, but also we keep this bishop open to control the h4 square, so then white doesn't have knight f3. And yeah, now knight f3, there is e4, obviously. There is no knight h4. So white can um, change the plans and take on e5. D takes e5, queen d8. Again, whenever white takes on e5, it makes sense to trade the queens. But we take with the bishop. And of course, it would have been better to develop this knight on c6, but also on a6 is fine. Knight f3. We can see why the knight was better on c6 now, because here e5 is attacked. Bishop f6. As I mentioned before, we don't want to go e4 because of knight d4, and again, there is some pressure on f5. But we have bishop f6. e4, this was played in all the games so far. This is how white continued. Knight e5 may seem like it's a strong move, but now c7 is defended, so we can just go knight e7, knight f6, gf6, and finally all the central pawns are covered. And black is doing fine. Here we have very good control over the center. So, but e4, again, renewing the threats on the f5 pawn. Knight e7, we need to defend that pawn. Castle. White should finish the development, and now probably he wants to go b3, bishop b2. Knight c5 is good. Of course, now we want to take on e4, or even play bishop e6 to attack on c4. And black has a good position here. It's important that we manage to stabilize the position and keep this e5 pawn defended. We have control over the d5 square because of this knight on e7. And well, knight b5 may seem like a good idea, going for cheap tricks to attack on c7, but it's bad. It doesn't work. We can just take on e4. And then white is in trouble. Now let's see bishop g2. Actually, this move makes a lot of sense. No more bishop on h3 or whatever. With this bishop, white wants to put pressure on our queen side. Bishop e7. Our plan is to go knight f6, castle, queen e8, c6. So we have this plan, and basically this works for all the English opening lines. Yeah, I want to mention that knight f6 is the most played move in this position, but it will lead to the same thing. Somehow we start with bishop e7, but yeah, knight f6 is next. So here we have several moves. There is d3, d4, knight f3, and e3. All of them make sense. Let's see them one by one. d4, again, white can go for this since we don't want to take on d4 anymore because we played this move f5. This can be reached also via different move orders. For example, if white goes d4 before playing bishop g2, then bishop e7, and then bishop g2. Knight f6. We just continue with the same idea. And here there is knight h3, d takes e5, e3, and knight f3. Knight h3 looks like a cool move. However, I mean, just to keep the light squared bishop open, but the knight is not doing great on the edge, and obviously we're not going to push e4, so we will keep the position like this. Okay, but we just castle, and then c6. This is what I like very much about our setup against the English opening. You don't need to learn much, just you need to remember this easy plan and you get a great position. Okay, of course there are some lines where you need to know some subtleties, but otherwise just go for this setup and you get a great position. b3, going for the double fianchetto. Knight a6. This is how to reply to a move like knight h3. You go with the knight on the other direction. But again, just like white strategy, for us it works the same. We want to keep the c8 bishop open. So that's why the knight always goes to a6 and not d7. Because imagine the knight on d7 would have no perspective, but on a6 it can go to c7 and it's fine. The bishop on c8 is good. Bishop a3, the bishop is more active on a3 than on b2. And here we need to take into account this move d takes e5. It's a threat. But it's easy to parry this. We can just go queen e8 and stick to our plan. There is no need to try some fancy stuff with queen a5 because of bishop b2. And now we have the queen on the wrong side of the board. We want to bring it instead maybe to h5. White continues the development and he wants to bring the rook to d1. And here it's good to develop the bishop. We want to develop the bishop to e6, but on the other hand, we don't want to see knight g5. So we go h6, controlling g5 square, and then we're ready for bishop e6. Rook a d1. Yeah, white wants to open up the d file, so it makes sense to put the rook to d1. Bishop e6. Again, here both sides made their useful moves and both sides finished development. The knight on h3 looked like a cool idea before, but now it's misplaced. So it could be a target for us, and we have useful moves. Again, it depends on what white is doing here, but we can go, let's say, knight c7, rook d8, maybe bishop f7. Bishop f7 is good, so that white cannot go d5. So I like black's position here. I'd rather play this with black. Now let's see, d takes e5. We have seen this in similar positions. Again, I don't think this pawn trade is justified. D takes e5. Queen d8 was the idea. Bishop d8. And I think this is a good version for black because we take on d8 with the bishop and we can still castle. Knight f3. Now white is attacking the e5 pawn, but it's easy to defend it with knight c6. We've seen this in similar positions. Again, we don't want to go e4 because of knight d4, but now after knight c6, um, controlling the d4 square, now we want to go e4. And again, black's position is already preferable. Another good thing in this position is that c7 pawn is defended, so white doesn't have tricks with knight d5 or knight b5 because this pawn is defended. So yeah, white shouldn't go for this. Now let's see e3. This is possible to go knight e2, castle, and then b3, bishop b2, something like this. But the knight on e2 will be restricted by the e5 pawn. So we just continue with c6 to restrict the light squared bishop. Castle is the same thing. We these positions we even have the luxury to change the move order. Basically, it leads to the same. You don't have to remember these lines move by move. 92, but instead just to know the plan. So castle. And yeah, then we can decide maybe we want queen e8. Sometimes even e4 to block the g2 bishop. But first of all, let's complete the development. Castle. And here e4 is possible. Of course, other moves are good as well, but e4. Okay, it gives up the f4 square for white, but we want to reinforce the center with d5. And white doesn't have a good way to stop us. And if we manage this strong pawn chain in the center, then the bishop on g2 will be passive. And here, let's see f3, just to trying to open up the position, or d5. White can do this to stop us from playing d5. So f3, immediately challenging the center. We go d5. We need to reinforce the e4 pawn. C takes d5, let's say. Here, you need to remember this important detail that if white takes on e4 with the pawn, we want to take back with the d pawn, so as not to be left with a weakness on d5. And like this, we also keep the f5 closed, and then these pieces are not active. If white goes queen b3 here, which is tempting in this kind of positions, then the idea is to take here, then and grab a pawn with taking on e4, since there is this pin. Of course, we get out of the pin, king h8, cd4, cd4. Let's say knight f4, and it seems that white is finally ready to take on d5. But here we can just go knight c6, and again, white is not able to take on d5 because of knight a5 ideas. Here you can notice that king is very good on h8. It's white doesn't have checks against the king. And since white cannot take on d5, it means that his whole strategy failed here. And we're left with a very nice center. cd5, white is trying to create a weakness on d5 and then attack it. cd5, and now f takes c4, clearing the center. And again, it's important how to take back here. And the right capture is d takes c4, of course. And I just want to show you why not f takes e4, because then the pawns are really vulnerable. And after queen b3, threatening to take on e4, king h8, then white can give up on exchange, but then d5 is going to fall, e4 is going to fall, and so our whole center is falling apart, and white is much better here. So this is the thing to avoid. Just take with the d pawn. And now the bishop is closed, and also the rook on f1 is not doing much because f5 is well protected. White doesn't have, white cannot play h3 and g4 because then the king would be weakened. So let's say bishop d2, developing the last minor piece. We got knight c6. And here you can see that the pawn on e4 is restricting white's activity. And well, white is still in the game here, but if he doesn't do something, then he can easily end up in a much worse position. For example, we want to go bishop e6 or even bishop d6, and it's much easier to improve black's position. Whereas with white, I think you have to be very precise. And then there is d5, simply stopping us from pushing d5. And again, white wants to follow up with f3 to open up the bishop. Knight b d7. You can see that now we don't go on a6 anymore, but we have knight e5 is there. And from e5, of course, the knight could go to d3. We're attacking c4 and so on, controlling critical square f3. Here, white has to break the center before we manage to go knight e5, so f3. Here, the easiest solution is to just take on f3. This pawn sacrifice with knight e5 is possible, but it's not necessary. Why sacrifice the pawn when we can just take on f3, bishop f3, and now knight e5. And now the knight reached an ideal square, and if white allows it, we want to take on f3, because then the white king will be quite weak on the long term. Bishop g2, white is securing the bishop. And now it's very important, we cannot take on c4 because of d takes c6. So we just go bishop d7, finishing the development. Again, defending the c6 pawn. And we want to go queen e8. You can see in this position, it's important that the c6 pawn is well defended. We have a really great knight on e5. One idea I'd like to go for in this position is to go h5 and h4 just to weaken white's position, and then maybe we can even get an attack on the king. In most cases here, it's not good to take the pawn on c4 because white always has some tricks. We would be pinned here, but probably white will sooner or later defend the c4 pawn anyway. Yeah, here I would go queen e8, and then I like this idea with h5, h4. It looks really great. So black is fine. And now let's see knight f3. White is forcing us to take a decision regarding the e5 pawn. And the solution, like in all these lines, is to push it forward. Knight g5. And now the typical c6, because we want to play d5 at the right moment. And also another idea is to go knight a6, knight c7. Here we're going to see d5 and knight h3. D5 is stopping us from pushing d5. And here we want to go knight to d7 and e5, but we need to be careful about the e6 square. So first we go h6 to drive the white knight away. There is also a trick here with knight takes d5. I mean, only if you're looking for tricks in the positions, but white can also take on e4, knight b6, and knight d2. So it was just a trade. We didn't really take a pawn. This is possible, but perhaps black is a slightly more passive here. So it's not necessary. Of course, during the game, it can be tempted to consider 95, but just make natural moves, h6, knight h3. White has to go back because knight e6 is bad, just loses a pawn. Bishop e6, d6, and then queen c8, and we round up the e6 pawn without compensation for white. So knight h3, and now knight b7. As I mentioned, this knight is heading towards e5. And castle, knight e5. Well, excellent position for the knight. Also, there is a threat on c4. Let's say white defends the pawn with b3. And here, okay, you can go castle and black is fine, but it's more interesting to take advantage of this position and just go h5. And the idea is to push h4 and get an attack. Again, white lacks a clear plan. In the meantime, we have a very strong idea, this push on the king side. And if I were to play white, I'd feel in danger here. So knight h3, white is rerouting the knight to f4. At the same time, she wants to go maybe first bishop g5 and then knight f4 just to solve the bishop on c1. we going for normal development, castle, castle, and now this important move. Well, it's important to know that it works because otherwise it's very tempting. D5 to get very strong center. The only question is if we manage to keep this center, because if we are in time to stabilize the position, then of course white will have problems on the long term because of the g2 bishop. Already here, d takes e5 is a threat to grab a pawn. So let's say white takes on d5, cd5, and bishop g5. The idea is to get rid of a defender of the d5 pawn, then go knight f4, queen b3, and just take the pawn. Knight c6. It's also possible to go for bishop e6 here, but knight c6 looks better to me. It's a concrete move because if white goes queen b3, there is knight d4, so it doesn't allow white's queen b3. Knight f4, white is stopping, is preventing bishop e6, and now there is a threat of bishop f6, then okay, d4 would be under attack, so e3, and finally white would be ready to take on d5. This is the plan, but we have this clever move, knight g4 here, and after bishop e7, knight e7, the knight rejoins the defense of the d5 pawn, and this is big achievement that d5 pawn is well secured. The other knight will come back to f6, so black is fine. And here, if white allows us, we can even go g5 later on to get rid of the f4 knight. And yeah, we are left with this strong center versus the passive bishop on g2. Now we're going to see knight f3. White wants to castle quickly. And yeah, this is very natural developing move. Our plan stays the same, knight f6. Castle. Here white is not yet decided what to do with the d pawn, either go d3 or d4. At the same time, we don't want to go e4 with black, not just yet, because then white has the d4 square available and he will be able to undermine our pawn with d3. But of course, just follow the plan, castle. This is very good. And here we're going to talk about d3 and d4. d4 is attacking our pawn at once. And as usual, we push it to e4, knight g5. c6 is our natural reply here. d5 can be investigated as well, but I'd rather prefer c6 because we always play like this, and it's also easier to remember. But said, there's nothing to remember, just follow the plan. And now, of course, the idea stays the same. We want to go d5. We also want to go knight e6, knight c7. And we're going to see d5 and knight h3 here. Knight h3, white prepares bishop g5 and knight f4. But we just go d5 and it transposes to the line that we've seen before. So d5, trying to stop us from pushing d5 once and for all. again, we go h6 just to drive this knight away, and then we want to go knight d7, knight d5, knight h3, knight d7. The knight is heading to e5. White needs to do something about this, so we're going to see b3 or f3. F3 makes more sense to break the center right away. If b3, okay, b3 defends the c4 pawn in advance. It has rarely been played. 95, the idea is the same. I like this knight on e5 very much. It's really active. But now, okay, compared to the other line, we castled, so we cannot really push h5, h4. Or we can, but it's not as effective as before. Bishop b2, finishing the development, and plan is to go queen d2 and f3 at some point. Rook a d1 and so on. And okay, since white played bishop e2, again, this plan with h5 works, and we're going to play h4. And this works because the bishop doesn't have access to the g5 square anymore. So this just shows how good black's position is. I prefer this plan with the rook on h8. I think it was even stronger, but even here it really looks nice. And yeah, this is a very good idea because after we play h4, we weaken the g3 pawn, and then it's not so good for white, or it's more difficult for white to go f3 because his king side will be weak. So just remember this idea with h6, h6, h5. It looks great. Now let's see f3. White is undermining our center right away. 95. The knight gets to the central square. We don't want to take on f3 yet because it would be a strategical concession. We want to keep the tension as low as possible. 95. Now c4 is under attack. b3 and queen a5 is a nice move, attacking on c3, but also there is a deeper plan to bring the bishop into play via d8 and b6. And indeed, the bishop would be very active on b6. I like it very much. And here, okay, white has to go bishop d2. I will show you in a moment what happens to bishop b2. But bishop d2 is the good move. However, here we have queen c5, then c d5, and black is totally fine. Yeah, I like this very much for black. And there is also a trick that if white goes bishop b2, I hope you'll not miss these tricks during your games. It's just a bit of geometry. Knight c4 is possible now, bc4, and then queen b6. It's with check, and bishop on b2 drops. So white is better off to avoid this. d3 is possible, and this is a typical setup. There's really nothing wrong with this setup for white. It's like a dragon position, but of course it's also very often seen in the English opening. Here we just go queen e8, and the idea is to go c6, maybe a5, knight a6, and so on. We could slightly take advantage of white's move order here to go a5 to stop b4. this is good, but also here, for example, instead of d3, if white really wants to, he could go b4. So we're just going to see this d3, queen e8. Let's let white execute his plan with b4. White goes b4. This is the whole point, to grab space on the queen side, push the pawns, and try to create some weaknesses in our camp. We want to delay b5. We cannot really stop it, but just to delay it with a6. Because now white will have to play a4 and then do something about the a1 rook, or play the bishop b2 or rook b1. Yeah, I just want to mention here that it's tempting to go for an attack with queen h5 and then follow up with f4, but white can go e3 and then with knight d2 to swap the queens. So that's why I'd rather keep the queen on e8, and it's a good idea to take into account your opponent's counterplay. So just to stop it with a6, even a5, if possible, in different move orders, if it was possible, you could have played a5 straight away when the pawn was on b2, just to stop this. And okay, white goes a4, keeps on pushing. And now we want to go bishop e6, but of course we need to first control the g5 square. We go h6. This is typical move. We've already seen this idea before. Bishop b5. White wants to go b5, but he needs to have the a1 rook defended if we take on b5. And the bishop reaches the square e6. Now we develop the bishop and we want to go c6, knight b7, and then queen h5, f4, and so on. But it's always good to complete the development first before going for an attack. White pushes with b5, c6, taking control of the d5 square. And after natural moves, we reach this position, which is very complicated and with chances for both sides. It's important that we control the d5 square to restrict the bishop. And then we want to go knight b7. Yeah, and here if white tries knight d2 to open up the bishop and put more pressure on our position, we can even go f4 and we have possibilities for an attack. Then there is e3 with the obvious idea to develop the knight to e2. This setup is seen in the closed Sicilian. Well, we're not impressed with this either. Just follow up our plan. Knight f6, knight e2, and now castle. I mean, c6 leads to the same thing, but let's say castle. Castle, c6. And now we've already seen d4. It transposes. So now let's see d3. White tries to keep the center flexible, and like this, okay, the sacrifices with f4 to start an attack don't work anymore. And now there is the idea to go rook b1, b4, and just push on the queen side, or even more restrained to go b3, bishop b2, with very solid position. Here we can go a5, a good prophylactic move to stop the b4 push. b3, white is going for the double fianchetto. Knight a6 is good to develop the knight. And of course it goes to a6 because we want to keep the c8 bishop active. Bishop b2, queen e8. We keep the option to go queen h5. So we don't always go queen h5 because um, we can do it, but we can also leave the queen on e8 for now. We have ideas to develop the bishop to e6, for example, because here we don't have to play h6 anymore. There is no more threat of knight g5. So bishop e6 looks like a good move. If white is trying to play f4, then there is this idea to go bishop d8, bishop b6. Then the bishop is going to be very active on b6. So here both sides finished the development, and I can say that the game starts from here. The position is with chances for both sides. It's about balanced. d3. Okay, just another move order. White wants to most likely to go knight f3. We continue with knight f6. And here, of course, e4 would transpose, knight f3 would transpose. So we're going to talk about some moves that have a distinct value. So let's say rook b1. This is tried sometimes in the close Sicilian. There, black is trying this idea to just go for a quick b4, b5 push before developing the knight. And here, okay, white claims that he has an extra tempo. It's useful to include this move a5 to, if white wants to push before, at least we're going to open the a file, which is not such a big deal, but anyway, our rook will be active, so why not? a3, again renewing the idea to push before. Castle b4, it's, as I said, it's good to open up the a file. A takes b4, a takes b4. And now queen e8, the typical move. Again, we want to go c6, bishop e6, queen h5, maybe h6, depending. We go h6 if white puts knight to f3. So white has to castle and he goes knight f3. Now we want to go bishop e6, so h6 is there to stop knight g5. We are ready to play bishop e6. Castle, bishop e6. The bishop is developed there. Bishop b2. Knight b7. And again, we got a position like this. White is also very solid because of the double fianchetto. But we also developed our pieces, and our pieces have good squares. And again, the plan is easy. Just go c6 and queen h5. And yeah, afterwards, why not try to go for an attack with f4, bishop h3, and so on. Black is completely fine here, and again, it's unclear, fully playable position. Okay, so these were the lines, and now let's go for a short recap. So in this chapter, we saw the positions of the c4, d6 when white doesn't go, d4, e4, I don't know. This can be reached also from the move order e4, d6, c4, but it looks somehow strange to me. I think black is doing well after e5, knight c3, and then this f5. I like it. I like the positions, the resulting positions here. Knight c3 is more flexible. E5 and yeah, whenever white goes Now our idea is to go f5 and knight f6, and this knight f3, f5, d4. Whenever white goes d4 with knight f3, we just push e4, and this is fine for us. Knight g1, c6. And then the plan is to go knight f6, knight f6, bishop e7. And otherwise, if g3, f5, most likely in a game you'll meet here bishop g2, bishop e7, and okay, white has different setups with the pawn on e3, knight e2 with the d3 and knight f3, or even to push d4 and knight f3. But black is fine in all these lines, and black's plan is to just go knight f6, castle c6, and there is fully playable position. Even in some lines, black can get an advantage out of the opening. Thank you for watching.